My one standing joke is I think I did something really bad in a previous life.
To be made the editor of a Catholic newspaper.
I know this is not Orthodox, Catholic or even Christian faith, but all the available evidence seems to fit the picture. I think I was probably a Viking or something. I was running around burning down monasteries and so on.
And this is your punishment. Welcome to another episode of This Catholic Life. Conversations about life's ups and downs, big and small, how we deal with every situation imaginable, whatever life throws at us, but still manage to be sensible, practical, and joyful. Today's show is titled Old News. Not so much a topic about the news, but about the various ways we get the news, how we access it, the kind of skills and talents and things to look for in the news. I'm your host, Peter Holmes, and today I'm joined by Rian Galliot, artist, resident geek and co-host.
Hi, Peter.
And by our special guest, Peter Rosengren, who is the editor of the Catholic Weekly and has been around the traps in different editorial roles in journalism. Welcome, Peter.
Great to be here, Peter.
Excellent. And full disclosure, Peter and I have enjoyed many debates over various bad habits over the years and enjoyed working with him in various ways in the Catholic Weekly.
Well, I think the last bad habit was Thai food, wasn't it?
I think it was, yes, Thai food.
Yeah, that's it.
That's probably the least bad habit we've mutually indulged in.
Well, it's a bad habit that's a good one to have.
Indeed. If carries the worst, it gets. That's a good thing. Before we get started, just a reminder that if you like the show, you should subscribe to the podcast on your podcast app. That way you won't miss an episode. So, old news, what do we mean by that? Now, it's a bit of a pun on the fact that a lot of people think that newspapers or print media is an old thing and it's dying. So first thing we want to talk about is what's the ideal? What's the good part of, or how do you know something's a good newspaper? And then we'll get into the future, if you like, of newspapers. So to start off with, I'll throw this one at you, Peter. What makes a good newspaper?
Well, that's a great question. I belong to that unusual group of people who I'm in love with print.
Right.
And I know there's this whole debate that's going on about whether print will survive.
Right.
Because of online and everything like that.
And when you say print, is it just the physical nature of it? So you've got a book in your hand, or you're talking about the spreadsheet, the broadsheet sort of newspaper?
Yeah. Personally, I'm in love with all of them. I love reading books. I can't read ebooks. I just can't do it. I belong to that generation.
Have you tried a Kindle?
Yeah, I've tried a Kindle.
Was it a Paperwhite? Sorry to be an advertisement.
Yeah, it was a Paperwhite. I think I know what you mean by that. I just belong to that generation, which is pre-digital, really. I've still got cameras at home that use film, and I don't have digital cameras.
Where do you get them done? I don't even know where to get them serviced these days.
It's just getting expensive.
Yeah.
Look, it's a really interesting question. I think that print and digital complement each other.
Okay.
I think print will survive. If you go down to the news agency around the corner from the building in which we're sitting and you look at all the magazine racks, they're full of very big, very colourful, beautifully printed magazines on all sorts of subjects. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about that is if you were to stand there looking at them, you'd realise that the people who are producing them are not doing it because they're in love with the subject that the magazine is about.
Right.
They're producing it because they make money out of it.
Right.
So I think that print, without going into lots of specifics, has certain advantages over digital, but digital is real. It's the way of the future, and we have to use to harness and exploit the digital platforms. And, of course, that's what we're trying to do in here with the Catholic Weekly. We have a print platform. We have a digital platform. They go together nicely. I'm not sure that we understand it perfectly. I don't even think Rupert Murdoch does. I think if Rupert Murdoch understood it, we'd all hear about it very quickly.
Right.
But in general, what makes a good newspaper? Well, I think regardless of whether you're talking about a newspaper online or one that you're physically holding in your hand, which is my preferred method, you want to pick it up and read it.
Right.
And you don't want to stop, and you want to peruse the newspaper and leaf through it and then flip back a few pages and go, that's interesting.
Right.
And then you find, whether it's online or print, that the things you read, you're sharing in conversation
Right.
with friends and acquaintances.
It's the water cooler talk.
Yes, the water cooler talk. For me personally, I just want to know about the world.
Right.
I want to know what's going on.
There's a certain amount of decision making in what, and I'm asking the question from who wags. There's the tail wag the dog.
Sure.
But, what does an editor think when they're thinking which stories go in? Because there must be a temptation to say this one's a really sensationalist story. It's not as important and relevant to their lives as this other one, which is really boring.
Yep.
So,
it's a bit of a balancing act.
Right.
Actually, that's a very interesting question. I've thought for many years that being an editor of a newspaper, and once again, whether it's print or online, it doesn't really make any difference.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit like standing in the middle of a blizzard.
Right.
And you've got millions of snowflakes around.
Right.
And you're trying to pick various snowflakes to put them all together to complete the jigsaw puzzle.
Right.
In that sense, it can be very difficult. What do I look for?
I just had a mental image of you building a snowman in the blizzard.
I have a great snowman story, but there's not enough time to tell it.
Fair enough. Sorry, go on.
But I think that's the essence of a good newspaper. And so what do I look for? Well, I'm aware of what the key issues are in general terms,
right,
confronting the church. Editors, journalists, masters of all trades.
They have to know a little about everything.
They have to know a little about everything, but they don't hold doctoral theses in, if you're a religious affair. Well, you could, but it's not normal.
A doctoral thesis knows a lot about a little.
That's right. And you could write some very interesting doctoral theses about newspapers and journalists and editors. Possibly one of them might be...
you just said interesting doctoral theses. I haven't come across any of these yet.
No. Well, you haven't considered my idea.
Go on, sorry.
No, it could be that if we shut all the newspapers and all the newspaper editors and journalists, the world might be a nicer place.
Yeah. All right. We just say these opinions are not endorsed by this Catholic life.
No, not seriously. Journalism has a critically important role to play in our society, and one of the things I care very much about, even though I'm going a bit off topic in saying this, is what I might call excellence in journalism.
Right.
But, what do I look for? I look for things which are currently in the news and which people will want extra information about.
Sure.
I think of them in terms of whether I can put them online immediately, or whether in the print edition of the newspaper they will still retain their interest and their informative value by the time people see the newspaper. We're, of course, a weekly, so there's a lot of planning ahead. And then you tend to separate online versus print.
Yep.
I tend to think of the print platform as something for the more serious reader, for someone who we're out mainly in parishes on weekends.
Right.
So therefore, hopefully on a Sunday, people have got time in the afternoon to sit down and have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine.
Certainly when I'm seeing it,
Yep. I don't think there's time during the week. There could be, but that'll be the general picture for most of our readers, I think. The online thing's a bit different because we're constant. We're always online, and we're updating daily and putting things on Facebook.
It seems to be a convenience thing too. When I used to go to work when I was a lot younger, you'd get your seat on the train, and you're more likely to be reading the newspaper that the guy next to you's got.
That's right.
He's spreading, one of the broadsheets right across three people. And
I remember those days.
Whereas these days, I haven't seen a newspaper on a train for years.
No,
and you'll see people scrolling through something like the Australian or the the Sydney Morning Herald or something on their phones.
It's mobile phones.
Yeah,
30 years ago, I remember exactly what you're talking about because I used to sit on suburban trains in Melbourne.
Right.
And train platforms and rush hour and so on. And in those days, the big newspaper in Melbourne, or one of the big ones, was called The Age, and it was a broadsheet.
Yes, I remember.
So people in Melbourne had developed the technique, which was a really good trick, but it was very practical. They developed the technique of folding their newspapers.
Yes.
And working their way through the newspapers. And there was this constant folding, unfolding, refolding, folding again.
And you could tell the editors had worked with this because the articles would be in the columns to match the fold. It used to crack, sorry, just a brief story on this one. It used to crack me up when I used to be on one of those platforms that the express trains bypassed and went through.
Yep.
And you'd have all these people who'd shuffle right to the edge of the platform to maintain their spot when the train came. But they were holding up broadsheets. And if a train came through at 100 miles an hour, about a third of them would be standing there with only half the newspaper after it had gone past.
I love broadsheets, but I think this is getting off the topic. I
Yes,
think the age of broadsheets is probably gone.
Right.
But the other thing that I look for actually is, and this is peculiar to working on a religious newspaper and specifically a Catholic newspaper.
Right.
My one standing joke is, I think I did something really bad in a previous life.
To be made the editor of a Catholic newspaper.
I know this is not Orthodox, Catholic, or even Christian faith. But all the available evidence seems to fit the picture. I think I was probably a Viking or something. I was running around burning down monasteries and so on.
And this is your punishment.
So the punishment, because you see, it's no surprise to anyone sitting here at this table, or I would imagine to anyone listening to this program, but the Catholic Church is not, in our society, the most popular institution in the world.
Certainly not in Australia, no.
Yeah, not in a secular society. I would say in countries very much like ours, which are, I tend to think of them as materially relatively affluent. So industrialised, urban, predominantly Western, so Western European, North and South American society, Australia, New Zealand and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a real challenge here. And the second thing, so there is that. There is this whole... The modern era has moved decisively away from formal belief in a tradition like the Christian tradition, much less the Catholic tradition, in those sorts of societies. And we've seen that repeatedly in countries like Australia with various packages of legislation that have been passed and intense debate around them. But generally speaking, the Christians are on the losing team.
Almost always, yep.
And that's likely to be the case for the future. So I'm what I'm really working my way around to saying is I'm very conscious that my job is to not only to inform, but to form, to provide information about the church which is formative. And so when you're talking about euthanasia or abortion or same-sex marriage or the really any of these sorts of issues, I want to also provide our readers, usually through our comment and opinion pieces, information that supports the church's teaching, or which, I shouldn't say supports, which explains why the church is the way it is, why it believes what it believes.
Gives a context.
And what makes that incredibly difficult, is the very real phenomenon of things like abuse.
Right.
I think Catholics, in a strange kind of place at the moment, they sense that society is shifting and the culture is shifting, and it's not going in the direction they would like it to see.
Right.
And then a huge part of the problem is, just before we went on air, we were talking about the case of Jean Vanier.
Right.
Now, by the time this program comes out, that will be several weeks in the past. But I mean, Jean Vanier is the founder of a movement called L'Arche, which I think is a French term for the Ark.
Yes.
And he was revered by not only Catholics, but many people around the world.
Especially for his work, and the fact that his work helped many people of differently abled people be incorporated into communities and the church itself. Yeah,
that's right. So you have those things come out. Now, interestingly, I think 40 or 50 years ago, Catholic newspapers would not report that much in detail on instances like this. Certainly, if a member of a religious order, for example, was convicted of something like this, you could be fired for reporting it, and that has happened.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what makes producing, this is one thing which makes producing a Catholic or a Christian newspaper incredibly difficult, because basically you know that people out there who are critical of the Catholic Church can say, who are you guys to talk to us about this or that or something else? Look what some of your guys have done. And of course it's gone. We have now, living in the United States, a gentleman called Mr. Theodore McCarrick,
Yes.
was formerly a cardinal of the Catholic Church.
Indeed.
And that's so I think that's been very disheartening for Catholics. There's the reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the fact that you're trying to propose something to your readership and to ordinary men and women, regardless of whether they're Christians or Catholics, which is Christianity, the church.
So if I can bring that back to the news, I think you're absolutely right that in the past perhaps they wouldn't have said it, but the very fact that you have, in fact, included such stories in the Catholic Weekly, and you're not alone in that. The Catholic News has been quite almost brutal and more explicit about reporting these things. In fact, the Catholic agencies seem to be at the forefront of uncovering it in the first place.
Yeah.
We, in a sense, we're actually practicing what we preach. That you know, where there's something to say, we say it. There's truth to be spoken, we say the truth. And even more so now that we've learned a very hard lesson.
I believe very firmly that, well, really this applies to the whole media, but it applies especially to Catholic media, that we need to be objective and professional at all times, but we also need to be prepared to be countercultural, to go against the tide or the spirit of the age.
Not just for the sake of it, of course.
Yeah. No, not just for the sake of it, but because philosophically the Catholic media need to be committed above all other things to the truth.
Okay.
Now, it just so happens that we're running a Catholic newspaper and we believe the gospel is the truth. This is what we propose. Interestingly, religious media has been on the wane in the secular, or religious journalism has been retreating in secular media for decades now. And one of the things that I think is very strange about that is that if you look around the world today, there are, I don't know the number and I don't think anyone does, but there are billions of people for whom religious faith is pretty much the most important thing in their daily lives after eating and earning a living.
Yeah. And so the fact that we're not taking account of that, or we're not even considering that as a major factor in world events or even in personal lives, is a major oversight.
Most people today would not understand, for example, that the assassination of Indira Gandhi, the Indian Prime Minister, several decades ago now, was not for political reasons. It was a religious assassination.
Oh, wow.
And it was carried out by members of her bodyguard who were Sikhs. And they decided to assassinate her because before that she had sent Indian troops into the most sacred site for the Sikh faith, which is the Golden Temple in Amritsar.
Okay.
And effectively, I think they killed people. It's a long time ago, but they were very violent and they, in the eyes of the Sikh faith, defiled and profaned their most. It would be like someone sending troops into the Vatican or into the dome of the mosque of the Dome of the Rock. Now, it has happened, of course. I think Napoleon did it, and presumably one or two others have done it, and Rome has famously been sacked. But in modern terms, a few people, and at the time that happened, almost no one in the world's media picked it up, with the exception of one journalist in California, which is interesting. And so religious faith is actually intensely important in people's lives. And therefore, there's a story to be told and to be explored and to be shared.
In fact, it's part of the story, really. It's not just about us telling a story about some religious people.
Yeah.
The religious element. We had William Kavanagh on the podcast recently, and he had a lot of things to say about the more we attempt to shuffle religion into the corner, the more religious elements and themes come out in secular society.
Well, for several decades now, 20, 25 years, I'd have to go back and check the exact date, but if you look at the Middle East, all the conflict that's been happening, it's not only political, it's religious.
Right.
Muslim against Muslim, Muslim against Christian, and so on and so forth. And vast tragedies.
But let me just play the devil's advocate here. Some people would say, "Oh, see, all we need to know about religion is it causes all this trouble and people kill each other, and so we should get rid of religion. That's why we don't talk about it."
Sure.
But clearly understanding it leads us to the sort of commentary where we say, this particular kind of interpretation of this particular religion is quite different to this other interpretation, and hence why there's a conflict there.
Yeah, there are lots of things you could say. I mean, I understand the argument, but war is not peculiar to religion. No. Religion can be taken up and used as an excuse to enter into conflict with other people, but the complete absence of religion has often been used essentially as a justification to do the same and, in fact, far worse.
All right, so we've explored the religious element of the print. Now I'm going to come over to my co-host here, Ryan Galliot, and ask him, as a representative of a slightly younger generation than me, and I'm saying slightly with tongue-in-cheek here, the online content versus the print content.
Look, I'm one of those people I actually really love holding the physical to read that. But there's no denying that when I am surfing the internet, being able to grab the snippets, one story instead of seeing the whole newspaper,
right,
is very handy, and it's easier as a young Catholic to share that story on my Facebook or social media pages as snippets that will interest other people. Yeah, and we've seen how they can spark news debate.
Articles and passing
yeah, that's right. Yeah. But that said, it's also seeing those religious articles. It's also in competition with what's out there now in the me being a geek, getting the news about the latest Marvel movie or TV show coming out, or the latest Star Wars movie, and
that rates on the same clickbait level as watch out, the whole world's coming to an end because there's a meteorite coming.
Yeah, that's right.
By the way, Spider-Man's coming out.
Yeah, but you were saying before, Peter, that only one reporter managed to report on that story. Being in the internet now, that story might have been shared once, but then retold and repackaged by how many people and gotten out there so much. It's definitely, you were speaking about the telling what happened, but also being formative in some way.
Yep.
I'm finding, especially with the Catholic newspaper, that's something that I've been able to do on my page on Facebook, as well as some of the pages I take care of. That it's been a way in which we can, I guess, share that message of Christ.
How much of it? How we tend to Google algorithms notice what we notice.
Yeah.
Right. And they check what we click, and Facebook does the same thing. I bought something for my kids, and then it's within minutes, it's appearing on Facebook ads all over the place.
Yeah.
If we're clicking on certain types of news in that environment, really all we're ever going to see in the end is stuff that they think we're interested in.
That's right.
And so it becomes self-perpetuating. And there must be so firstly, your comment on that?
Well, I mean, yeah, there is that, and there's people that will totally stay away from things like that. But then that also falls on us as practicing Catholics who might have access to this information to post it on our pages or to make comments, or because that will turn up on their news. So there is a way in which, I mean, it's part of that sharing the good news.
Yeah. So that question then throws to the editor over here and asks Peter,
the former Viking, the ex-Viking.
As I understand the laws of reincarnation in that particular theory, you'd be a worm, not a person.
Okay, that's interesting.
Being a person, is quite high on the ranks. So
well, maybe I was a very good Viking. I was unusual in that regard.
We might use that as the promo, I think. All right, so coming back to the editor in you and asking the question, how great is the temptation, and is it a good temptation or a bad temptation to pander to an audience, to say, I know they want to hear this particular piece of news?
That's probably the best question you've asked so far. I mean, they've all been good questions, but I think that's
maybe
really...
I'll get above a worm when I come back.
No, well, worm, cat, eagle. The great temptation, I think, and in fact, this goes to my criticism of the state of the media today.
Right.
The great temptation is exactly that.
Clickbaiting.
It doesn't forget whether we're talking about print or digital.
Yep.
It's spectacular in digital, but it's there in print all over the place. There is a kind of a paradox about the media. We have this very elevated idea of it. And I do believe the media has an extremely important role in our community. It needs to be an independent or relatively independent voice which conducts or subjects issues and topics to a searching scrutiny which is objective.
Right.
So that people can say, he said this, he said that, he did this, she did that, and they can come to some basic grasp of what happened and what they think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But the media, for the most part, exists to make money.
Right.
And this is precisely where I think, particularly in the age of the internet, what has happened, I think, is there's this beautiful Middle French term from the Middle French, dégringolade, which means a general tumbling down, a sort of state of disintegration. And I think the rise of the internet has hastened precisely this sort of problem we're talking about. And I think the real problem, personally, I think the golden age of the media may have been 40 or 50 years ago.
Right.
Well, you were saying earlier, Peter, that you mentioned the term excellence in journalism. And I mean, I visit a lot of these fan sites as a geek. People reporting this or that, even in the news, and you find people that really don't know anything about journalism writing what they want, and a lot of these.
You find a lot of journalists doing that.
Yeah. Well, a lot of these articles that I've read, they have that clickbait title, but they might only have 2 points that are actually worth saying in 2 sentences, and they'll repeat the same thing 7 times, and so you've got a half a page long article that really is only 2 sentences long.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think the temptation for online and print to chase what the audience wants rather than focusing on what is important.
So there seems to be a training element there, that the training for journalists must include a certain understanding of the logic of arguments, investigation, a responsibility to report the truth, and to find those elements of the story which are of interest to the person, not that will catch their interest necessarily, but which are objectively of interest to their situation in life. But can I perhaps prod you again and ask you about sub-editors who, I don't know, this is a rumour, they write the headlines of things.
It's not a rumour.
And so what we have is that I've often seen journalists whinging about the fact that they'll write quite a serious article and the sub-editor's looking for the clickbait in it and pulls it out and throws it up front.
Of course.
And so quite a serious article somehow becomes only of interest to people because it's about Fergie's dog or something like that.
Well, there are certain words you can put, if you can work them into the headline, you're almost going to guarantee that people will say, what's that about? Yeah. Training for journalism was historically carried out on the floors of newsrooms.
Right.
Journalism is not a profession.
Ah.
I don't think it's a profession.
Aren't people trained as journalists?
Yes, but people are trained as truck drivers and carpenters and so on and so forth. I think of medicine as being a profession.
Right.
Legal practice as being a profession. I think journalism is much more of a craft.
Okay.
And journalists traditionally were trained, and they were trained on the floors of newsrooms. Journalists did not have degrees in communications or whatever else they're called these days.
Yep.
And I've got to say that my limited experience of graduates of media training courses have left me very skeptical.
Right.
Kids who come out of university believing they've received an education in journalism, they can't spell.
Right.
They rely on autocorrect.
And therefore they can't express themselves very well.
They can't, in some cases, write a sentence. Subject, object, verb. Now, I don't have a brilliant grasp of grammar because when I went through school, even then grammar was regarded as unfashionable. But the man chases the cat across the room. They can't, and they have no grasp of grammar.
Right.
And I don't think that media degrees are terribly helpful to anyone. If someone came to me and said, I want to be a journalist, I'd say think carefully about it because I think the whole industry is in turmoil and it's not clear where it's going. And one of the problems is both on newspapers and websites, this is shared across both, is there is, as the revenue-making ability of newspapers and magazines has been increasingly removed by the website, newspapers respond traditionally by cutting staff.
Right.
Less people are expected to do more work. And I am just astonished at the errors that appear both online and in print. And yes, I have produced newspapers with errors in them. And you look at them and you think that is so basic.
But is that partially because the people who are looking down and deciding how many staff they need, they can evaluate how many people it takes to run a machine that prints a certain thing or how many you need to physically involve in it. But what they can't or don't seem to respect is how many minds, how many sets of eyes, how much thinking is involved behind a genuine investigation, a genuine decision from an editor on, is this interesting, is this relevant, is this worthy, newsworthy, that kind of thing.
I think that would be a significant part of the problem because, as I said before, at the end of the day, some people buy or sell newspapers. I mean, in the sense of buying the company or selling the company. Yep. They're only doing it for one reason.
Yes.
That's to make money. What makes the most money? And, and therefore an editor and a chief executive has to produce an annual report. They have to report to the shareholders, to the board. Are profits up? Is circulation up? Is it down? That's all they're interested in. So I think, I'm not saying that's the only reason, but I think there are other contributing reasons, one of which is, I'm sad to say that I think the younger generation of journalists who've come into the practice in recent decades, in the last 20 or 30 years especially, they seem to me to have almost no knowledge of history, which is very important for context. They seem to have little understanding that they've become participants as activists for particular views or beliefs, rather than people who, whatever their personal views are, can say, well, this is the argument for, this is the argument against, or this is the statement for, and this is the statement. What we have, I think, and it's a very widespread problem, is journalists who don't have this grasp of basic history, and they become participants. They become, in a certain sense, the activists.
Right.
Now,
a rebel without a cause kind of thing.
Yeah, it's and you see it in all sorts of areas. I would say I understand the basic arguments around, say, something like same-sex marriage, but I would say the media were almost universally in favour of legalising same-sex marriage, and didn't bother making too many bones about that.
But I would say that they weren't just in favour of it. That wasn't really my beef with them, because in any debate there's going to be people on one side or the other. My beef was that none of the arguments were actually seriously entertained, as in there was no attempt to put the legitimate rational arguments in.
Well, look, it's easy to generalise, and it's always somewhat risky. Of course, that's true. But then a generalisation, you could say, is generally true. So to generalise, I would say that the opponents of same-sex marriage got very little hearing. They were portrayed as extremist, dangerous individuals who were intolerant of others, and the picture was overwhelmingly negative. And those who were in favour of it were portrayed in opposite terms. And this is despite the fact that on a number of occasions, I can remember one meeting booked in a hotel by many organisations that were looking at how they would mount the case to preserve marriage as being exclusively between a man and a woman. And the hotel received death threats, bomb threats, and everything like that.
Yeah.
But you did not see the media rushing to be sympathetic to those who had received those threats.
Or to defend the freedom of speech in those cases.
Or to defend the freedom of speech. And, of course, freedom of speech is now, I think, it's the issue that's front and centre.
But having said that, it is necessary, if we're defending freedom of speech, and this is very much related to media of any kind, if we're defending freedom of speech, that it's necessary to argue for, not necessarily personally get involved in defending a particular thing, but necessary to argue for the freedom for people to say something we don't like to hear.
Of course, of course.
And therefore, and this was one of my... And also that
when
we
was denied during the debate.
I think it was.
I think that was, largely absent.
I agree. But I have to say, in fairness to both sides of the story, when I was dealing with some elements, and I'm not having a go at the Catholic Weekly here, but I'm just simply saying some elements of the people trying on social media to push the pro-marriage case, I guess, and I mean by that people defending the definition of marriage as a man and a woman, that they tended to be a little bit clickbaity in their attempts and that wasn't helpful for their cause. So, because it only takes one or two little instances of someone being uncharitable or being simply untruthful or being scaremongering.
Or even violent or threatening.
Indeed. All of those things. And even if one person lashes out in that way or one newspaper prints something that's uncharitable, it can be seen as, you give these guys a go and...
Well, that's interesting because I think this harkens back to the point that I began with about, if you ask me personally, I regard myself as a member of the church.
Right.
I'm there because I believe in it.
Yep.
And I believe in it despite the human history of the church.
Yes. And that's the only way to believe in the Catholic Church, in spite of its history.
In spite of its history. And I think the biggest problem for Christianity traditionally, this would apply to every Christian denomination, including the Catholic Church, I think, is that its biggest enemies have not been outside.
Yep.
It's from inside. So we have seen in recent years...
The old quote, by the way, from Napoleon, that he says, "I will destroy your church." And the Archbishop says, "Not even we have managed to do that."
Isn't that a beautiful...
Yes.
That sums it up.
Yes.
I think Hilaire Belloc, the great Anglo-French Catholic author from about 100 years ago, he expressed it by saying that, the Catholic Church has been run since its beginning by such a combination of fools and knaves that it could not possibly survive unless it was divine. So the problem, this is a real problem. So, I mean, one of the problems we have, and this would be common to to most media, I think, is we have social media.
Right.
And with social media, people can jump on and comment about something.
Right.
And there are people out there who, as far as I can tell, are looking at our social media because they're Catholic or Christian.
Right.
And they jump on, and some of them can say incredibly uncharitable, hurtful things.
Yes. Yeah. And not very well-informed things.
And not very well-informed things. And it's strange because you could say they have good intentions, but that's not an excuse.
No.
That's not good enough.
No.
They're behaving, and once again I'm generalising, but they're behaving in the opposite way to what the gospel calls us all to be.
So is there something about a way a Catholic goes about writing a journalist story or a news article or an editing in a newspaper which makes us uniquely and particularly Catholic? Just not in so much in our content that it's about Catholic things, but just if you're reporting on a news article that's just happening in Australia, what would be different about the way a Catholic would report it?
Well, the way that you've just jumped to the next level. That's even better than the question you asked me before.
Advanced animal, perhaps a dog or something like that.
Well, I think we would be talking about an ideal world.
Yes.
Because my philosophy of Catholic journalism is different to what the Catholic media has traditionally been.
Right.
The Catholic media has, I think, traditionally been weak because it's focused mainly on stories like, and I don't want to be unkind in putting it this way, but how could I put it? Monsignor McFarskey's 65th anniversary of priesthood. Now, that's actually an important story.
It is.
And it's important for the Monsignor, his family, his friends, and all the parishioners he's known. Mm-hmm. But an endless succession of stories of religious anniversaries or anniversaries of religious life.
Yep.
That's not Catholic journalism.
Right.
The only way
That's news about Catholics.
It's news about Catholics, but that's what the Catholic media in this country and many other countries, I think, at least in the English-speaking world, historically have tended to be.
Right.
There's an interesting side point to this too, which is I think the absolute best examples of Catholic media that I know of, newspapers and online and magazines. None of them are owned by the church. It's true. They're all owned privately and run privately. If you go to the United States, for example, you would have the three biggest and best-known Catholic newspapers, National Catholic Register, Our Sunday Visitor, National Catholic Reporter, NCR. The first one I mentioned is regarded as being quite conservative. The one, NCR, the second one, is regarded as being quite liberal or whatever the term is. And OSV, Our Sunday Visitor, which I admit has personally been my favourite over recent years, is pretty much in the centre of the road.
Right.
And it focuses on saying, no, we're not conservative, we're not liberal, we're Catholic. And I think that's interesting. Generally speaking. And I think, by the way, what you're doing on the podcast here is fabulous. My ideal Catholic journalism is philosophically committed to the truth. It's charitable. Being uncharitable is the big temptation of the Catholic media. Now,
that doesn't mean not being critical, though, does it?
No. People, there is a kind of a tendency which Pope Paul VI warned about. I think he was warning bishops, but actually it applies to the whole church.
Yes.
And it applies to the Catholic media. He warned against what he called a false Irenicism. And he pointed out to be Irenic is perfectly legitimate.
That means peaceful, for those of you who don't know that.
Yes, it means to be peaceful. It
Serene.
means to try and bring everyone along with you and persuade people and so on and so forth. But he warned against a false Irenicism, or a false form of it, which he defined as if you can't persuade everyone in the room to agree with what you're proposing, you don't do anything. And he said this becomes a form of paralysis.
Yes.
Now, that's important in understanding the difference between commentary and opinion and criticism, which is perfectly legitimate, and news, which is just basically meant to be objective. And the big failing of the Catholic media over the last 30 years or so, I think, is demonstrated by the abuse phenomenon.
Right.
We, as the Church, the reporting of the abuse phenomenon was really precipitated by a newspaper in the US called the Boston Globe.
Yes.
And it famously reported on abuse in the Boston area in the Archdiocese, which is one of the big, powerful, important dioceses in the Church in the United States. And in fact, a book and a movie were produced out of it, the Spotlight movie. Now, you could argue about how appropriate their reporting was, and they certainly, I think that I saw a statistic somewhere that said that in 300 days they published 900 articles on abuse in the Catholic Church in Boston.
Wow.
Now, whether that was sensationalism, I can't say. I wasn't there. I didn't read it. But the Boston Globe precipitated the wider spread of the reporting of the phenomenon of abuse. And at least in a general sense, I can say, thank God it did.
Yes.
Because there was a real problem with the Catholic media essentially before that period being very much the in-house, placid, pet.
Yep.
Don't know what the word is.
Mouthpiece of the institution.
Yes. The Monsignor says this, the Bishop says that.
Yes.
So on and so forth. So the Catholic media have moved together with the Church a long, long way, and it's extremely important that that's happened.
And it's worth mentioning, for the sake of this podcast at least, that although it is an arm of, it's produced by the Archdiocese in that sense, the instructions we have aren't that the bishops have been pushed aside and we're now doing real kind of investigation. The bishops themselves have said we want genuine discussion, we want genuine disagreement, we want genuine differences of opinions, and demonstrate how this kind of investigation, how this kind of discussion goes about.
One of the most important articles I run each week, I think, is Archbishop Anthony Fisher's homily in the paper. And I've got to say, I know this will sound like I'm trying to flatter him or something like that.
He doesn't listen to us, I'm sure.
Okay, well, it's safe.
He can say it.
He's prolific.
Yes.
I wish I had Archbishop Fisher as a journalist working for the Catholic Weekly, because he just produces, and it's all very, very good.
Yes.
Occasionally,
it was very depressing when he was my doctoral supervisor, and trying to match his standards. It was very depressing.
Look, I'm an editor. I say I'm just a parrot, right? I'm the parrot sitting on the perch in the corner of the room, and all I do is repeat things I hear. But even I have to reach for the dictionary occasionally and I find new words in the Archbishop's homilies. But the point is, one of the reasons why I think it's important is he's the bishop. he's the one charged by the church with the responsibility of teaching, sanctifying and governing the flock that in the Catholic faith has been entrusted to his care by the church and we assume by God. And his role as a teacher, as an explainer of the faith, I think is obviously of fundamental importance. And so therefore running his homily is actually an important thing. And I'm quite sure, I don't know the numbers, but I'm quite sure that there are people in all sorts of unusual places who read them. And I've heard some very funny stories over the years about people who read homilies. And I've even received... It
helps that his homilies are actually worth listening to, and they're quite well put together, because some of the homilies I've heard over the years might not make good copy.
They're good reading. They're good reading. His homilies are good reading. I know that might sound like you're the editor, so therefore you have to say that. No, I don't. I've been around the church in Australia, and he's not only producing the volume, because he writes several talks and homilies a week. And frankly, I think, where does he get the time? Because he has to run the archdiocese. But the quality is very good, and they're very readable. And, you know, we have, I'm certain, an older rather than a younger readership for the print platform. And I'm sure that there are many people in that readership who love to read his homily each week because it gives them something about the meaning of their lives. By the way, an interesting note about the Catholic Weekly is, as I've said, we have an online audience and we have the print platform audience. And we know that the online audience are not the print audience. They're younger. They're the Ryans, the Ryan Box Galliots.
That's me.
And so we have, without us ever intending to do it, we've ended up with two audiences.
Right.
Yeah. We've got one group of people reading the paper.
So here's my question. Here's my question to sort of wrap this whole thing up in terms of print media and internet media. Is it an age thing that happened just for that era, and that by the time we get 30 years ahead, everyone will be on the internet? Or is it that when the older I get, the more likely I am to pick up a newspaper? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Could it be that when Ryan gets to down the track and he retires, that he switches across to a print media? What do you reckon?
Well, first let me say that I have to pay tribute to Ryan's artistic talents, because I first met or came to know of Ryan, how many years ago was it?
10 years now.
Yeah,
it's 2010.
10 years ago. And we had this idea at Easter to do a kind of a visual presentation of the last 24 hours in the life of Jesus.
Right.
And it was across a whole 2-page spread in the centre of the page. And someone, I think it was Bridget Spinks, put me on to you, and we developed it. And Ryan delivered this incredible graphic, which we ran just full size across 2 pages. And I've never forgotten it, and I hope to repeat that again. But back to the question, it could quite possibly be that in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, no one knows.
Right.
We'll all be reading Kindles or glowing screens.
Whenever I hear that, though, I walk past a record shop and see them reselling vinyl.
Yeah. Exactly.
And go,
Look,
perhaps the vinyl is a place to wrap it up. Any last words, Peter?
Well, yeah, I think that we shouldn't put necessarily all our faith in digital, although we have to be realistic and go wherever everything is going, because we have a message about the church and we want to use every platform that's available. I would use carrier pigeons if that turned out to be. But we still have, in libraries around the world, plate glass negatives from experiences like the American Civil War or the First World War. And we have billions and billions and billions of electronic digital images and pages which are here today, but they're gone tomorrow.
Right.
So all I can say is, like everyone else, I'm waiting to see how it all pans out, and I guess I'll even if reluctantly, will go whichever way that turns out to be. But for the time being, the focus is, for me, is we're representing the church, we're reporting on the church. I want us not just to be a newspaper or a news site for Catholics. I want ordinary men and women and young people out there in our society to either pick up a copy of the Catholic Weekly on a newsstand or look at it online. And if they were to say it's wrong, but it's interesting,
Right.
then I would think my job is successful.
Okay.
I think that's it.
Cool. Well, that's it for this week's podcast. If today's discussion got you thinking or arguing with your podcast device, let us know. You can subscribe to our podcast at thiscatholiclife.com.au or on your favourite podcast app. Keep in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook or Discord, and drop us a line at info@thiscatholiclife.com.au. Don't forget to write us a review on any of those things if you can. It helps get the word out. Remember that this is a uniquely Australian Catholic podcast, and we think that's an idea worth getting behind. So tell your friends. It is time for shout-outs.
Shout-outs.
Box.
Well, over the last few years, I've slowly gathered a number of people, parents mainly, and also some friends and people out there that I've met, asking me to review games and television shows in light of, what's appropriate for kids and how to break it down while they talk to their youth. And so I've been doing that a lot lately, and I've been binge watching a few episodes of a few series, I should say. So I shout out to those parents and friends of mine who rely on some level on my opinion.
That sounds like a business opportunity there.
Yeah, maybe.
I know. I checked the IMDb parents ratings, but yeah, I reckon you could have something going there.
Oh,
decent Catholic movies. There you go. Peter, any shout-outs?
Coming up to our 20th engagement anniversary soon on the Feast of St. Joseph. So therefore, he said, looking sideways at the host of the program, I just want to tell Monica I love her, and I'm glad we're together and want to be together as long as we can be, and thank you for our beautiful children.
Lovely. Thank you. And on that note, I'll shout out to all those hardworking journalists, especially the ones we had Damien Fisher on, he calls himself a newspaper lifer, which I had to look up after he said it. And those people who've worked to produce journalism with integrity, which isn't always the most popular or most financially viable ones, but you have my respect, and please continue to support and look for those journalists. That's all for now. Thank you for listening to This Catholic Life.